The old bus wheezed to a stop at the dusty station in Cedar Falls, Montana. Through the scratched window, Elena could see the small town stretching out before her like something from an old Western movie. Her heart pounded as she clutched the worn leather handle of her only suitcase. Inside were all her belongings: 3 dresses, some undergarments, a few family photos, and her grandmother's recipe book wrapped carefully in cloth. Elena had been traveling for 3 days straight. First the long flight from Kyiv to New York, then another flight to Denver, and finally this endless bus ride through mountains and plains she had only seen in pictures. Her body ached and her mouth felt dry as sand, but none of that mattered now. She was finally here in America, about to meet the man who would become her husband. For 6 months, she had exchanged letters with Robert Whitmore, a cattle rancher who lived just outside Cedar Falls. The marriage agency in Ukraine had shown her his photograph, a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile standing next to a beautiful house with white columns. In his letters, Robert wrote about his ranch, his horses, and how lonely he felt living by himself. He seemed sweet and caring, always asking about her family and her dreams. Elena had grown up in a tiny village where opportunities were as scarce as rainfall in summer. Her father died when she was 15, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. There was never enough money, never enough food, never enough hope. When the marriage agency came to their village, Elena saw it as a chance for a better life, not just for herself, but for her younger sister Anna, who was still in school. The bus driver called out, "Cedar Falls, Montana." Elena took a deep breath and stood up on shaky legs. Other passengers pushed past her, eager to get off and stretch their legs. She waited until the aisle cleared, then carefully made her way down the narrow steps. The mountain air hit her face, crisp and clean, unlike anything she had breathed before. For a moment she just stood there, taking it all in. The sky seemed bigger here, wider and bluer than back home. Snow-capped mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants. It was beautiful, but also scary in its vastness. Elena looked around the small station, searching for Robert's face among the handful of people waiting. Her English was still rough around the edges despite months of practice with an old dictionary and phrasebook. She had memorized important sentences. "Hello, I am Elena. Thank you very much, and I am happy to meet you." A black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, engine rumbling like thunder. The door slammed shut, and Elena saw a tall man in a cowboy hat walking toward the station. Her heart jumped. This had to be Robert. He looked different from his photo, older maybe, with deeper lines around his eyes. But people always look different in real life than in pictures. The man stopped about 10 feet away from her and looked her up and down slowly, like he was inspecting a horse at market. Elena felt her cheeks burn under his stare. She was wearing her best dress, a simple blue one her mother had sewn for her, and her only pair of good shoes. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she had scrubbed her hands until they were raw to hide the calluses from years of hard work. "You, Elena?" the man asked, his voice flat and cold. "Yes, I am Elena," she replied carefully, trying to remember her practiced pronunciation. "You are Robert?" He nodded but didn't smile. "Get in the truck. We need to talk." Elena's stomach twisted with worry. This wasn't how she had imagined their first meeting. In her dreams, Robert would smile warmly, maybe even hug her gently and tell her how glad he was that she had come so far to be with him. Instead, he turned and walked back to his truck without helping her with her suitcase or even looking back to see if she was following. The drive to his ranch took 20 minutes through rolling hills dotted with cattle. Elena tried to make conversation, commenting on the beautiful scenery and asking about his animals. Robert answered with short grunts or single words. The silence grew heavy between them, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the country music playing softly on the radio. Robert's house was even grander than in the photograph. It sat on a hill overlooking a valley filled with grazing cattle. The white columns gleamed in the afternoon sun, and flower gardens bloomed on either side of the wide front porch. It looked like a palace compared to the tiny wooden house Elena had shared with her family back in Ukraine. But as beautiful as the house was, the man beside her felt like a stranger, cold and distant. Nothing like the warm, caring person who had written those letters. Elena wondered if maybe he was just nervous too. After all, this was a big step for both of them. Perhaps once they talked and got to know each other in person, things would get better. Robert parked the truck and got out without a word. Elena followed him up the front steps, her suitcase bumping against her leg with each step. The porch was wide enough for several rocking chairs, and Elena could imagine sitting there in the evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains while Robert told her about his day with the cattle. Inside, the house was even more impressive. High ceilings, leather furniture, and family photos covering the mantel above a stone fireplace. Everything spoke of money and success. Elena had never been in such a fancy place before. She felt small and out of place, like a sparrow that had wandered into an eagle's nest. Robert led her to the living room and pointed to a chair. "Sit," he said, like he was talking to one of his dogs. Elena sat down carefully, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap the way her mother had taught her. She waited for Robert to sit down too, maybe offer her something to drink after her long journey. Instead, he stood by the fireplace looking down at her with those cold eyes. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "You're not what I expected." The words hit Elena like a slap across the face. She blinked, wondering if she had misunderstood his English. I do not understand," she said slowly. Robert sighed heavily, like she was already becoming a burden. "Look at yourself. Look at your clothes, your hands, the way you talk. I thought I was getting someone different. Someone who could fit in here, be a proper rancher's wife. You're too rough, too foreign. The people in this town, they have expectations." Elena's throat felt tight, but she forced herself to speak. "I can learn. I want to learn. In my letters, I tell you I work hard, I cook good food, I take care of house. It's not enough." Robert cut her off. "I need someone who can host dinner parties, talk to the banker's wife, represent the Whitmore name properly. You're not suitable for this life." The room spun around Elena as his words sank in. 6 months of letters, of dreams, of hope, all of it crumbling like dust in her hands. She had given up everything to come here. She had said goodbye to her family, used her mother's life savings for the agency fees, and traveled halfway around the world. And now this man was telling her she wasn't good enough? "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Robert reached into his wallet and pulled out a roll of bills. "This should cover a bus ticket back to wherever you came from. There's a motel in town where you can stay tonight. The bus leaves tomorrow morning." He dropped the money on the coffee table between them like he was paying for groceries. Elena stared at the bills, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She wouldn't cry in front of this cruel man. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. With shaking hands, she stood up and picked up her suitcase. "I do not want your money," she said, her accent thicker now with emotion. "I will find my own way." Robert shrugged like it made no difference to him. "Suit yourself. Just be gone by morning. I've got a reputation to think about." Elena walked to the door, her head held high despite the crushing weight in her chest. As she stepped onto the porch, she heard the door slam shut behind her. The sound echoed across the valley like a gunshot, final and cruel. Standing there in the shadow of the grand house, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, Elena made a promise to herself. She would not go home in shame. She would not let this heartless man destroy her dreams. Somehow, some way, she would build a life here in America, and maybe, just maybe, she would show Robert Whitmore exactly what kind of woman he had thrown away. The walk down from Robert's ranch felt like the longest mile of Elena's life. Her suitcase grew heavier with each step, and the straps of her good shoes cut into her heels. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, refusing to look back at the big white house on the hill. By the time she reached the main street of Cedar Falls, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town was smaller than she had expected. Just one main street with a few shops, a bank, a post office, and what looked like a diner with bright neon lights in the window. Most of the stores were already closed for the day. Elena stood on the sidewalk, clutching her suitcase handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. Back in Ukraine, even when times were hard, she always had her family around her. Her mother's warm hugs, her sister Anna's silly jokes, even her grumpy brother Victor, who pretended not to care, but always made sure she had enough to eat. Now she was thousands of miles away from everyone who loved her, in a strange country where she barely spoke the language, with nowhere to sleep and only a few coins in her purse. The weight of her situation crashed down on her like a mountain avalanche. A bell jingled as someone opened the diner door. The smell of coffee and fried food drifted out, making Elena's empty stomach growl. She hadn't eaten since early morning, too nervous about meeting Robert to touch the sandwich she had packed. But food cost money and she needed every penny she had. "Honey, you okay out there?" Elena looked up to see a small Asian woman standing in the diner doorway. She was probably in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a flower-dusted apron over a simple dress. "I guess I'm fine," Elena managed, though her voice cracked on the words. The woman stepped closer, studying Elena's face with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen plenty of trouble in her time. "You don't look fine, sweetie. You look like someone who's had the worst day of her life. And carrying that suitcase around like you got nowhere to go." Elena's carefully built composure crumbled. Tears she had been holding back since leaving Robert's house finally spilled over, running down her cheeks like rain. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not mean to bother you." "Oh, honey, come here." The woman reached out and gently took Elena's arm. "I'm Mrs. Chen and this is my place. You come inside right now and tell me what's got you so upset." The diner was warm and cozy with red vinyl booths and a long counter lined with chrome stools. The walls were covered with old photographs of the town and its people. It felt like stepping into someone's kitchen, safe and welcoming in a way that Robert's fancy house never had. Mrs. Chen guided Elena to a corner booth and disappeared into the kitchen. She came back with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate loaded with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. "I cannot pay." Elena started to protest. "Did I ask you to pay?" Mrs. Chen sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee. "Now eat up and tell me your story." "I got all night." Between bites of the best meal she had tasted in days, Elena told Mrs. Chen everything. About the marriage agency, the long journey from Ukraine, her dreams of a new life in America, and Robert's cruel rejection. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, occasionally making soft sounds of sympathy or shaking her head in disgust. "That Robert Whitmore," Mrs. Chen said when Elena finished, "always thought he was too good for everyone else in this town. His daddy was the same way, rich and mean as a rattlesnake. I'm not surprised he treated you so poorly, but I'm sorry it happened to you, sweetheart." "What am I going to do?" Elena asked, voicing the question that had been haunting her since she left the ranch. "I have no money for bus ticket home. Even if I did, I cannot go back. My family, they sold everything to pay agency fees. They think I am married now, starting new life." Mrs. Chen reached across the table and patted Elena's hand. "First thing you're going to do is stop crying. Tears never solved anybody's problems. Second thing is, you're going to stay in the room above my restaurant tonight. I used to rent it out to travelers, but business has been slow lately. I told you I cannot pay, and I told you I didn't ask for payment." Mrs. Chen's voice was firm but kind. "Sometimes we all need help, honey. Today it's your turn to receive it. Tomorrow maybe you'll be the one helping someone else." The room above the diner was small but clean, with a single bed, a dresser, and a tiny bathroom. Mrs. Chen had put fresh sheets on the bed and left a clean towel on the dresser. After 3 days of traveling and the emotional beating she had taken from Robert, it felt like luxury. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and opened her suitcase. Everything she owned in the world fit in this one small case. Her grandmother's recipe book caught her eye, and she pulled it out carefully. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and the pages were yellowed with age. Inside were recipes written in her grandmother's careful handwriting: borscht, pierogi, cabbage rolls, and dozens of other dishes that tasted like home. Her grandmother had been the strongest woman Elena ever knew. She had survived wars, famines, and the loss of her husband and 2 sons. Yet she never let hardship break her spirit. "Cook with love," she used to tell Elena. "Food made with love can heal any hurt, fill any emptiness." Elena pressed the book to her chest and made a silent promise to her grandmother's memory. She wouldn't give up. She wouldn't let Robert's cruelty define her worth. Somehow she would find a way to build a life here. The next morning, Elena woke before dawn. She had barely slept, her mind racing with worry and plans. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress and braided her hair neatly. If she was going to ask for help, she wanted to look respectable. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was already in the kitchen, preparing for the breakfast rush. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. "You're up early," Mrs. Chen said, looking up from the griddle where she was flipping pancakes. "I need to find work," Elena said simply. "I cannot take your kindness without giving something back." Mrs. Chen smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Business has been picking up lately, and I could use an extra pair of hands. Can you cook? Elena's face lit up. Yes, I cook very good. My grandmother taught me many recipes. What about cleaning? Waiting tables? I can do anything. I work very hard. I believe you do, honey. Mrs. Chen wiped her hands on her apron. Here's what I'm thinking. You help me in the diner, cooking, cleaning, serving customers. In return, you get meals, the room upstairs, and a small salary. It won't be much, but it's a start. Elena felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. You are very kind to me. I will work hard, I promise. I know you will. Mrs. Chen handed her an apron. Now let's see what you can do with those recipes of yours. Maybe we can add some of your grandmother's cooking to our menu. As Elena tied the apron around her waist, she felt something shift inside her. Yesterday she had been a rejected mail-order bride with nowhere to go. Today she was a working woman with a roof over her head and a chance to prove herself. The breakfast rush started an hour later. Farmers and ranchers filled the diner, ordering coffee and eggs before heading out to tend their animals. Elena watched Mrs. Chen work, learning the rhythm of the kitchen and the names of regular customers. Around 10 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled, and Robert Whitmore walked in. Elena's heart jumped into her throat, but she forced herself to keep working. He took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee and pie, not even glancing in her direction. Mrs. Chen served him with cool politeness. How's the ranch, Robert? Fine, he grunted, stirring sugar into his coffee. Elena could feel his presence like a dark cloud, but she kept her head down and continued wiping tables. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his rejection had hurt her. As Robert finished his pie and stood to leave, he finally looked her way. For a moment, their eyes met across the diner. Elena saw surprise flicker across his face, then something that might have been shame before his expression hardened again. Still here? I see, he said coldly. Elena straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. Yes, she said clearly. I am still here. Robert dropped money on the counter and left without another word. Elena watched through the window as he climbed into his truck and drove away. Her hands were shaking, but her voice had been steady. She had faced down the man who tried to break her, and she hadn't backed down. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her with a warm smile. That's my girl, she said proudly. Now how about you show me how to make that borscht your grandmother used to cook? I think our customers might enjoy trying something new. Elena smiled back, feeling stronger than she had since arriving in Cedar Falls. Robert Whitmore thought she was unworthy of his name and his life. Maybe he was right about one thing. She wasn't meant to be a rancher's decorative wife. She was meant to be something much more important. She was meant to be herself. 3 weeks after Robert Whitmore threw her out of his life, Elena had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She woke before sunrise each morning, helped Mrs. Chen prepare for the breakfast rush, and worked until the diner closed at 9 in the evening. Her hands, already rough from years of hard work back home, grew even more calloused from washing dishes and scrubbing floors. But for the first time since arriving in America, she felt useful. The people of Cedar Falls were slowly getting used to seeing her around town. At first, many of them stared and whispered behind her back. Word traveled fast in a small town, and everyone knew about the foreign bride Robert had rejected. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with barely hidden disapproval. But Elena kept her head high and greeted everyone politely, even when they didn't return her smile. Morning, Elena, called out Tom Bradley, the mailman, as he stopped by for his usual coffee and donut. He was one of the first townspeople to treat her like a regular person instead of a curiosity. Good morning, Mr. Bradley, Elena replied, pouring his coffee without being asked. She had memorized how each regular customer liked their drinks. Tom wanted his coffee black with 2 sugars. Old Pete Morrison liked his weak with lots of cream, and Sheriff Williams always asked for decaf after 3 in the afternoon. Learning English was harder than she had expected. Mrs. Chen spoke slowly and clearly, but the customers often used slang and expressions that left Elena confused. When someone said it was raining cats and dogs, she spent 10 minutes looking out the window for falling animals before Mrs. Chen explained it was just a saying about heavy rain every evening after the diner closed. Elena sat at the small table in her room with an English workbook Mrs. Chen had bought her from the drugstore. She practiced writing sentences and learning new words by lamplight. Determined to speak like a real American, sometimes she read aloud to herself, trying to smooth out the thick accent that marked her as foreign, but it was the numbers that came easiest to her. Back in Ukraine, Elena had always been good at math. While other girls her age were dreaming about marriage and babies, she was helping her father figure out how much grain to plant and how to stretch their money through the winter months. At the diner, she quickly noticed things that Mrs. Chen missed. "Mrs. Chen," Elena said one morning as they prepared for opening, "I think maybe we spend too much money on coffee." Mrs. Chen looked up from slicing pies. "What do you mean, honey?" Elena pulled out a piece of paper where she had been writing numbers. "I watch how much coffee we use, how much we pay for it. If we buy from different company, we save maybe $50 each month." Mrs. Chen studied the numbers Elena had written down. Her math showed exactly how much coffee the diner used each week, what they paid per pound, and how much they could save by switching suppliers. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Chen said, impressed. "You're absolutely right. How did you figure all this out?" "I like numbers," Elena said simply. "Numbers always tell truth." Word of Elena's sharp mind for business began to spread through the small network of shop owners on Main Street. When Betty Harrison, who ran the flower shop, complained about her bookkeeping troubles, Mrs. Chen suggested she talk to Elena. "She's got a head for figures like you wouldn't believe," Mrs. Chen told Betty. "Maybe she could take a look at your books." Elena was nervous about her first real job outside the diner, but Betty was patient and kind. Elena's English was still rough, but numbers spoke the same language everywhere. She quickly found several mistakes in Betty's records and showed her a simpler way to track her expenses. "This is wonderful," Betty exclaimed, looking at the neat columns Elena had created. "I've been struggling with this for months. How much do I owe you?" Elena had never been paid for her brain before, only for cleaning and cooking and other physical work. Betty pressed $20 into her hand, more money than Elena had ever earned in a single day back home. That night, she carefully folded the bills and put them in an envelope, along with her tips from the diner. Every penny was precious, each dollar a step toward independence. As autumn turned to winter, Elena's reputation as someone who could solve problems grew. The owner of the hardware store asked her to help organize his inventory. The barber wanted her to figure out why his shop was losing money. Even Dr. Patterson, the town's only physician, hired her to straighten out his patient billing system. With each job, Elena's confidence grew stronger. She might not be the sophisticated wife Robert had wanted, but she was valuable in her own way. People needed her skills, and they were willing to pay for them. For the first time in her life, she felt proud of her intelligence instead of hiding it. But success in Cedar Falls came with a price. The more visible Elena became, the more she attracted unwanted attention. Some people in town still whispered about her foreign ways and questioned whether she belonged there. A few customers at the diner made cruel comments about her accent, and once she overheard two women at the grocery store calling her, "That Russian girl who thinks she's so smart." "I am not Russian," Elena wanted to tell them. "I am Ukrainian," but she bit her tongue and continued shopping for vegetables. Arguing would only make things worse. The hardest moments came when she saw Robert around town. Cedar Falls was too small to avoid him completely, and their paths crossed at the bank, the post office, and sometimes at the diner. He never spoke to her directly, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching and judging. Sometimes his expression seemed almost regretful, but Elena told herself she was imagining things. Robert had made his feelings about her perfectly clear. One snowy December evening, as Elena was closing up the diner alone, she heard a knock at the door. Through the glass, she could see a woman she didn't recognize, well-dressed with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive-looking jewelry. Elena unlocked the door cautiously. "We are closed, sorry." The woman pushed past her into the diner without being invited. "I know who you are," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You're that foreign girl who's been making trouble for Robert." Elena's heart sank as she realized who this must be. "You are Robert's friend?" "I'm Catherine Wells," the woman said, as if her name should mean something. "Robert and I have been close for several months now. We're planning to announce our engagement soon." Elena felt a strange pang in her chest, though she couldn't understand why. She had no feelings for Robert beyond anger and hurt. Maybe it was just the reminder of what she had lost. Not Robert himself, but the dream of marriage and belonging somewhere. "Congratulations," Elena said quietly. I hope you will be very happy. Catherine stepped closer, her eyes cold and calculating. Stay away from him. Robert told me how you threw yourself at him when you first arrived, how desperately you tried to trap him into marriage. It was pathetic, Elena's temper flared. She had been called many things in her life, but never pathetic. That is not true. Robert asked me to come here. He wrote letters, he made promises. Robert was lonely and made a mistake. Catherine cut her off. But he came to his senses quickly enough when he saw what kind of person you really are. You're nothing but a gold digger who thought she could buy her way into American society with a wedding ring. The words stung because they twisted the truth just enough to sound believable. Elena had come to America hoping for a better life, but not for money or status. She had wanted love, family, belonging, things that couldn't be bought or sold. I think you should leave now, Elena said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Catherine smiled coldly. Just remember what I said. Cedar Falls is a small town and we don't like outsiders who don't know their place. It would be a shame if your little businesses around town started having problems. After Catherine left, Elena locked the door and leaned against it, shaking with fury and fear. She had worked so hard to build a life here, to prove that she belonged. Now this woman was threatening to destroy it all because of a man Elena didn't even want. But as Elena climbed the stairs to her small room, her fear began to transform into determination. Catherine Wells might have money and connections, but Elena had something more valuable, the respect she had earned through hard work and honest dealing. The people of Cedar Falls had seen what she could do, and they valued her skills. Let Catherine try to cause trouble. Elena had survived poverty, rejection, and starting over in a foreign country. She could survive one jealous woman's threats. That night, Elena sat at her table and wrote 2 letters. The first was to her sister Anna back in Ukraine, telling her about life in America, the good parts and the bad parts, the loneliness and the small victories. She sent a $20 bill with the letter, her first gift to her family since arriving. The second letter was to herself, written in her careful English. In it, she listed everything she had accomplished since arriving in Cedar Falls, the skills she had learned, the money she had earned, the respect she had gained. When she finished writing, she folded the letter carefully and put it in her grandmother's recipe book. Someday, when people tried to make her feel small again, she would read that letter and remember what she was capable of. Elena had come to America as a rejected bride with nothing but a suitcase and a few dreams. Spring came early to Cedar Falls that year, and with it came changes that would transform Elena's life in ways she never imagined. The snow melted from the mountains, revealing green meadows dotted with wildflowers, and Elena felt something awakening inside her too, a confidence that had been buried under years of just trying to survive. It started with a simple observation at the bank where Elena cleaned twice a week. Cedar Falls First National was the kind of old-fashioned bank where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Mr. Davidson, the manager, treated his customers more like family than clients. Elena had been mopping the floors there for 6 months, invisible to most people who conducted their business around her. But Elena noticed things others missed. She saw Mrs. Patterson waiting 20 minutes every Tuesday for a teller to help her deposit her husband's medical practice earnings because the bank was always understaffed during lunch hour. She watched Mr. Rodriguez, who ran the auto repair shop, get frustrated every month when his loan payment was processed late because he always came in at the busiest time. One morning, as Elena was emptying wastebaskets, she overheard Mr. Davidson talking on the phone with someone from the head office in Billings. His voice was strained, worried about efficiency reports and customer complaints. When he hung up, he sat with his head in his hands, looking older than his 58 years. Elena hesitated at his office doorway, clutching her cleaning supplies. Speaking up wasn't her place, she was just the cleaning lady. But her grandmother had always said that keeping quiet when you could help someone was its own kind of selfishness. Mr. Davidson, she said softly, I am sorry to bother you, but maybe I can help with problem. He looked up surprised. Most people barely acknowledged Elena's presence, let alone asked her opinion about bank business. Help with what, Elena? Elena took a deep breath. I watch bank every day when I clean. I see customers wait long time, get frustrated. Maybe there is better way. To his credit, Mr. Davidson didn't dismiss her immediately. What do you mean? Elena pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket. the same one where she tracked her own expenses and income. Over the past few weeks, without really meaning to, she had been noting patterns in the bank's daily operations. Tuesday and Thursday, lunchtime is very busy, she explained, her English more confident now after months of practice. But Monday and Friday morning very quiet. If Mrs. Patterson come Monday instead of Tuesday, no waiting. If you have 2 tellers at lunchtime instead of 1, customers happy. Mr. Davidson leaned forward, interested despite himself. You've been watching our customer flow? Elena nodded. Numbers tell story. I write down what I see. She showed him her notebook, where she had carefully recorded busy times, slow times, and which services customers used most often. Mr. Davidson studied her notes, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. Elena had documented patterns he hadn't noticed in 30 years of banking. Her observations were detailed, accurate, and presented solutions he could actually implement. This is remarkable work, Elena, he said finally. How did you learn to do this? My father had small farm back home, Elena explained. I help him understand when to plant, when to sell grain, how to make most money from land. Same thing, different business. That afternoon, Mr. Davidson called Elena into his office during her break from the diner. I'd like to offer you a job, he said. Part-time to start, helping me analyze our operations and improve our customer service. It would mean giving up some of your cleaning work, but the pay would be better. Elena stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. You want me to work with numbers? Not cleaning. I want you to work with your brain, Mr. Davidson said with a smile. That mind of yours is too valuable to waste on mopping floors. Within a month, Elena was working at the bank 3 days a week, analyzing everything from customer wait times to loan processing efficiency. Her suggestions saved the bank thousands of dollars and dramatically improved customer satisfaction. Word of her success spread beyond Cedar Falls. When the regional manager came to visit and demanded to know how their small-town branch had become one of the most efficient in the state. But Elena's real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, her grandmother's recipe book. It started when she brought borscht to the bank's monthly employee potluck. The thick, hearty soup was unlike anything the other employees had ever tasted, rich with beef and vegetables and colored deep red with fresh beets. My goodness, Elena, said Janet, one of the tellers. This is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this? My grandmother teach me, Elena replied, pleased by the compliment. She say food is like love, best when made from heart. By the end of the lunch, Elena's borscht pot was empty, and several people had asked for the recipe. Word spread quickly through the small town. Soon people were stopping by the diner asking if Elena could make her grandmother's soup for them to take home. Mrs. Chen, who had watched Elena's confidence bloom over the past year, suggested they add some Ukrainian dishes to the diner's weekend menu. Your cooking is special, honey, she said. People are hungry for something different, something made with love instead of just thrown together. The first weekend they offered pierogi, cabbage rolls, and Elena's famous borscht. The diner was packed. People drove from neighboring towns to try the foreign food that everyone was talking about. Elena worked frantically in the kitchen, her hands flying as she rolled dough and stuffed cabbage leaves just like her grandmother had taught her. This is better than anything in the fancy restaurants in Billings, declared Judge Morrison, a man whose opinion carried weight throughout the county. Young lady, you've got a real gift. Elena glowed under the praise, but it was the sight of families sharing her food that meant the most to her. She watched a father teach his daughter how to eat pierogi properly, saw an elderly couple hold hands over bowls of borscht, and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or success. She was feeding people, nourishing them with recipes that carried the love of generations. As summer arrived, Elena found herself busier than ever. 3 days a week at the bank, helping to modernize their operations. Weekends at the diner, cooking the Ukrainian dishes that had become legendary throughout the valley. And increasingly, people were asking her to cater special events, birthday parties, church gatherings, and even a wedding. Elena's catering business started small, with Mrs. Davidson asking her to cook for her daughter's graduation party. Elena spent 2 days preparing traditional Ukrainian food alongside some American dishes she had learned from Mrs. Chen. The party was a huge success, and suddenly Elena's phone was ringing with requests. She rented space in the church kitchen for larger events, hiring 2 local women to help serve and clean up. Elena found she had a natural talent for organizing events, keeping track of multiple dishes and timing everything perfectly. Her business grew by word of mouth, the most powerful advertising in a small town. By autumn, Elena had saved enough money to rent a small house on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the diner. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that needed updating. But it was hers. The first night she spent in her own home, Elena sat on the front porch and wrote a long letter to her sister Anna. "I have my own house now," she wrote. "Not big, not fancy, but mine. I have business, real business, where people pay me to think and to cook. I'm not same girl who came here 2 years ago with broken heart and empty pockets. I am stronger now, Anna. I am American now, but still Ukrainian in my heart." The letter that came back from Anna a month later brought news that changed everything. Their mother was sick and Anna needed money for medical care. Elena didn't hesitate. She sent half of her savings home, keeping only enough to cover her rent and basic expenses. Family came first. It always had. Always would. But sending the money meant giving up her dream of expanding her catering business. She had been planning to buy professional equipment, maybe even rent a proper commercial kitchen. Now those plans would have to wait. Elena was walking home from the bank one Friday evening, tired but content despite the setback, when she saw Robert Whitmore's truck parked outside the hardware store. She hadn't seen him in months, though she heard through the town gossip network that his engagement to Catherine Wells had ended badly. Apparently, Catherine had expected a grander lifestyle than even Robert's ranch could provide. As Elena passed the truck, Robert emerged from the store carrying a bag of supplies. They found themselves face to face on the sidewalk, the first time they had been this close since that awful day at his ranch 2 years ago. Robert looked older, Elena noticed. There were new lines around his eyes, and his clothes seemed less carefully pressed than she remembered. He stared at her for a long moment, taking in her professional clothes, her confident posture, the way she carried herself like someone who belonged exactly where she was. "Elena," he said finally, "I heard you're doing well for yourself." "I am," she replied simply. No anger, no bitterness, just a statement of fact. The bank job, the catering business. People speak highly of your work. Elena nodded but didn't elaborate. She owed this man nothing. Certainly not an explanation of her success. 3 years had passed since Elena first walked into Cedar Falls with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. Now, standing in front of the building she had just purchased on Main Street, she could hardly believe how far she had come. The for sale sign lay at her feet, and in her hand were the keys to what would soon become Elena's kitchen, her very own restaurant. The building was old and needed work, but Elena saw its potential. Large windows faced the street, perfect for displaying the warmth and comfort that would draw people inside. The dining area was spacious enough for 20 tables, and the kitchen, while outdated, had good bones. Most importantly, it was hers, bought with money she had earned through her own hard work and determination. "You sure about this, honey?" Mrs. Chen asked, standing beside Elena as they surveyed the empty space. "It's a big step, going from catering to running a full restaurant." Elena smiled, remembering how nervous she had been 3 years ago when Mrs. Chen first offered her a job. "I am sure," she said, her English now smooth and confident. "This feels right." Mrs. Chen had been more than an employer. She had been a mentor, a friend, and sometimes like a mother. When Elena told her about buying the building, Mrs. Chen had insisted on helping with the renovation, claiming she was too old and set in her ways to handle competition, but too proud of Elena to let her struggle, alone. The process of transforming the empty, building into a restaurant consumed Elena's days and many of her nights. She learned to install tile, paint walls, and fix plumbing problems that would have cost hundreds of dollars to hire someone else to do. Her hands, already marked by years of hard work, acquired new calluses and small scars, but each one represented something she had accomplished herself. Elena's catering business had grown steadily over the past year, despite having to send money home for her mother's medical care. Word of her food had spread beyond Cedar Falls to the surrounding towns, and she found herself cooking for events as far as 50 miles away. Ranchers hired her to feed their crews during busy seasons. Church groups booked her for their annual fundraising dinners, and she had even catered a wedding for the mayor's daughter. But it was the letter from Anna that truly changed everything. Her sister had finished nursing school and found a good job at a hospital in Kiev. More importantly, their mother's health had improved dramatically, and the family's financial situation had stabilized. For the first time in years, Elena didn't need to send money home, which meant she could finally invest in her own future. "Anna wants to come to America," Elena told Mrs. Chen one morning as they worked on painting the restaurant's interior. "She has been saving money and learning English. She thinks maybe she can help me with the business." Mrs. Chen smiled as she rolled paint onto the wall. "That girl of yours is smart like you. 2 Volkov women in Cedar Falls? This town better watch out." Elena laughed, but she felt a deep excitement at the thought of having family nearby again. She missed Anna's quick wit and infectious laughter, missed having someone who understood her completely without needing explanations. The restaurant opened on a crisp October morning, with a line of customers waiting outside the door. Elena had spent weeks perfecting her menu, combining traditional Ukrainian dishes with American favorites and some fusion creations that reflected her journey between 2 cultures. Her pierogi came with options for traditional potato filling, but also with ingredients like barbecue pulled pork that appealed to local tastes. Dr. Patterson was her first customer, ordering the breakfast special of Eggs Benedict with a side of kielbasa. "I've been looking forward to this day for months," he told Elena as she served his coffee personally. "You've become quite the success story, young lady." The compliment warmed Elena's heart, but it was the sight of families filling her tables that truly satisfied her. She watched a rancher explain to his young son how to eat borscht properly, saw an elderly couple sharing a plate of her grandmother's cabbage rolls, and felt the deep contentment that came from feeding people well. By noon, Elena's kitchen was packed with a waiting list for tables. Elena moved between the kitchen and dining room, checking on customers, adjusting recipes, and making sure everything met her exacting standards. She had hired 3 local women to help: Mary as head waitress, Susan for prep work, and young Katie who was saving money for college. The success was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, Elena was getting calls from food writers at newspapers in Billings, and even Helena, wanting to feature the Ukrainian immigrant who's revolutionizing small-town dining. A travel magazine called her restaurant a hidden gem worth the drive. And suddenly, Elena found herself dealing with tour buses full of visitors eager to try her famous pierogi, but success brought new challenges. Elena found herself working 16-hour days, managing inventory, training staff, and trying to maintain the quality that had built her reputation. Some nights she fell asleep at her kitchen table, surrounded by receipts and order forms, only to wake up a few hours later and start all over again. It was during one of these exhausting weeks that Anna finally arrived in America. Elena had worried that her sister might feel overwhelmed by the pace of life in Cedar Falls, but Anna adapted quickly. She had indeed learned excellent English and proved to have inherited the family gift for business. "Elena, you are doing everything the hard way," Anna observed after watching her sister struggle with the restaurant's bookkeeping for several hours. "Let me show you a better system." Anna had studied not just nursing but also business management, and she quickly streamlined Elena's operations. She created efficient schedules for the staff, negotiated better deals with suppliers, and implemented a reservation system that reduced wait times and increased customer satisfaction. "You are the creative heart of this business," Anna told Elena. "Let me handle the business side so you can focus on the food and the customers." With Anna's help, Elena's kitchen became even more successful. They expanded the catering operation, opened for Sunday brunch, and started offering cooking classes where Elena taught people to make traditional Ukrainian dishes. The classes were always full, with people driving from hours away to learn the secrets of Elena's recipes. Elena also began giving back to the community that had embraced her. She donated food for church fundraisers, provided free meals for families going through hard times, and mentored other immigrants who were trying to start their own businesses. When Maria Rodriguez wanted to open a Mexican bakery, Elena helped her write her business plan. When the Patel family struggled with their convenience store, Elena showed them how to track their inventory more efficiently. "You help others the way Mrs. Chen helped you," Anna observed one evening as they closed the restaurant together. "Mrs. Chen taught me that success means nothing if you don't share it," Elena replied. "We are part of this community now. We help each other." The financial success allowed Elena to buy a larger house on the better side of town. Three-bedroom Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden where she could grow the herbs and vegetables she needed for her restaurant. She also finally brought her mother to America for an extended visit, fulfilling a promise she had made to herself years earlier. Her mother, Petra, was amazed by everything Elena had built. "My little girl who used to help count potatoes in our cellar," she said with tears in her eyes as she toured the restaurant. "Now you feed hundreds of people and employ a dozen workers. Your grandmother would be so proud." But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Elena received her American citizenship. Standing in the courthouse in Billings, raising her right hand to take the oath of allegiance, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. She was no longer caught between two worlds. She was fully American while remaining proudly Ukrainian. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about Elena's citizenship ceremony, with a photo of her holding her certificate in front of her restaurant. The headline read, "From Rejected Bride to Business Owner, Local Woman Achieves American Dream." Elena framed the newspaper article and hung it in her restaurant, not out of pride but as a reminder of how far she had traveled, not just geographically but personally. The frightened young woman who had been discarded by Robert Whitmore no longer existed. In her place stood a confident businesswoman who had created something lasting and meaningful. That evening, as Elena and Anna sat on the porch of their new house watching the sun set over the mountains, Anna asked, "Do you ever think about Robert? About what would have happened if he hadn't rejected you?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think I am grateful he did what he did. If he had married me, I would have become someone small, someone who lived in his shadow. Instead, I became myself," Anna smiled. "And look what yourself turned out to be." Elena looked back at her house, thought about her restaurant full of satisfied customers, her employees who depended on her, and the community that had embraced her despite her foreign origins. She had built something real and lasting, something that reflected her values and her heritage while embracing her new home. Robert Whitmore had called her unworthy, but Elena had proven him wrong in the most complete way possible. She hadn't just survived his rejection. The knock on Elena's restaurant door came on a Tuesday evening, 20 minutes after closing time. Elena was in the kitchen finishing the daily inventory when she heard the persistent rapping. Through the window, she could see a familiar figure standing under the streetlight, Robert Whitmore, looking more uncomfortable than she had ever seen him. "We're closed," Elena called through the glass, not moving to unlock the door. "I know," Robert replied, his voice muffled but audible. "I was hoping we could talk." "Please, Elena, it's important." Elena studied his face through the window. 4 years had changed him significantly. The arrogant confidence she remembered was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. His clothes, while still neat, lacked the expensive polish she associated with him. Most telling of all, his truck in the parking lot was several years old with visible rust spots, a far cry from the pristine vehicle he used to drive. Against her better judgment, Elena unlocked the door. "What do you want, Robert?" He stepped inside, looking around the restaurant with obvious surprise. Elena's kitchen had been featured in magazines and travel guides, but seeing it in person seemed to shock him. The warm lighting, elegant but comfortable furnishings, and walls covered with positive reviews and photos of satisfied customers painted a picture of undeniable success. "This is impressive," Robert said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I heard you were doing well, but I didn't realize. What do you want?" Elena repeated, crossing her arms. She had no time for small talk with this man. Robert's shoulders sagged. "I need help. Business help. I heard you've been consulting with other businesses in town, helping them solve financial problems. I was hoping maybe you could look at my books." Elena stared at him in disbelief. The man who had called her unworthy, who had thrown her out of his house like unwanted baggage, was now asking for her help. The irony was so complete it was almost funny. "Your ranch is in trouble?" she asked. Robert nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Bad trouble. I'm facing foreclosure in 60 days unless I can figure out a way to restructure my debts and improve cash flow. The bank suggested I talk to you." Of course they did. Elena's reputation for turning around struggling businesses was well established throughout the county. She had helped dozens of companies improve their operations, from small shops to medium-sized farms. But this was different. This was personal. "Why should I help you?" Elena asked bluntly. You made it very clear 4 years ago what you thought of me. Robert flinched as if she had slapped him. I know I treated you terribly. I was an arrogant fool who judged you based on superficial things. I realize that now, do you? Elena's voice was cool, professional. Or do you realize it now that you need something from me? Both, Robert admitted, meeting her eyes for the first time. Elena, I've watched what you've built here, how you've helped other people in this community. You've become exactly the kind of person I thought I wanted. Successful, respected, valuable to the community. But you were already that person when you arrived. I was just too blind and stupid to see it. Elena felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a softening of the anger she had carried for so long. She gestured to one of the tables. Sit down. Tell me about your problems. For the next hour, Robert laid out the financial disaster that had befallen his ranch. Poor management decisions, expensive equipment purchases financed with high-interest loans, a series of bad weather years that had hurt his cattle operation, and a divorce settlement with Catherine Wells that had cost him a significant portion of his assets. Catherine and I weren't married long, Robert explained. But she had expensive tastes and convincing arguments about investments that turned out to be anything but. When she left, her lawyers took half of what remained. Elena listened without comment, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting specific numbers. As Robert talked, she saw the pattern clearly. A man who had never had to manage money carefully, making one poor decision after another. His problems weren't the result of bad luck so much as bad judgment and worse planning. How much are you asking for my services? Elena finally asked. Robert looked surprised. I don't know. What do you usually charge? For a consultation this extensive? $500 a day plus a percentage of any money I save you. Elena's rate was higher than what she charged most local businesses, but Robert's situation was more complex. Also, she admitted to herself, there was a certain satisfaction in naming a price he might struggle to pay. Robert swallowed hard but nodded. That's fair. More than fair, actually, considering what I did to you. Elena pulled out her laptop and opened a new file. This is strictly business, Robert. I'll analyze your operation and give you my professional recommendations, but I won't work for someone who doesn't respect my expertise. Can you handle taking advice from the woman you once called unworthy? Yes, Robert said immediately. Elena, you're probably the smartest business mind in this county. Everyone knows that. I'd be honored to have your help. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into analyzing Robert's ranch operation with the same thoroughness she brought to all her consulting work. She spent long hours reviewing 5 years of financial records, studying his cattle breeding programs, and examining his land use patterns. Anna helped with the data analysis, creating spreadsheets and charts that revealed the full scope of the ranch's problems. This man made every mistake possible, Anna observed as they worked late one evening. It's like he was trying to fail. Not trying, Elena corrected. Just careless. He never had to worry about money before, so he never learned how to manage it properly. Elena's analysis revealed several critical issues. Robert had been carrying too much debt relative to his income, buying expensive equipment he didn't need, and failing to diversify his revenue streams. His cattle operation was inefficient, and he was missing opportunities to generate additional income from his land. But Elena also saw potential. The ranch had excellent grazing land, good water rights, and a solid reputation in the local cattle market. With proper management, it could not only survive but thrive. The day she presented her findings to Robert, Elena arrived at his ranch for the first time since that awful afternoon, 4 years earlier. The house looked the same, grand and imposing on its hill, but Elena felt completely different walking up those front steps. This time she came as a successful businesswoman whose expertise was desperately needed. Robert led her to his home office, a masculine room lined with hunting trophies and family photos. Elena spread her charts and reports across his desk, transforming the space into a boardroom where she was clearly in charge. Your ranch is savable, Elena began without preamble, but only if you're willing to make significant changes immediately. She outlined her recommendations with clinical precision. Robert needed to sell some of his expensive equipment and lease cheaper alternatives. He should diversify into agritourism, offering hunting packages and ranch experiences to city visitors. Most importantly, he needed to implement strict financial controls and regular performance monitoring. This plan could save your ranch, Elena concluded, but it requires discipline and hard work. Are you prepared to follow my recommendations exactly? Robert studied the documents, his expression growing more hopeful with each page. This is brilliant, he said finally. I can see how every piece fits together. How did you learn to think like this? Necessity, Elena replied simply. When you have nothing, you learn to make the most of everything. As she packed up her materials, Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. Elena, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond business. What I did to you when you first arrived, there's no excuse for it. I was cruel and wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. Elena paused in organizing her papers. Why? Because you need my help now? No, Robert said firmly. Because I realized what an extraordinary person you are, and how badly I failed to see it. Watching you succeed, seeing how you've helped others in this community, knowing what you've overcome, I'm ashamed of the man I was. Elena looked at him for a long moment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine remorse and perhaps wisdom earned through suffering. Your apology is accepted, she said finally, but it doesn't change anything between us. This is business, nothing more. Robert nodded. I understand. And Elena, thank you. Not just for helping save my ranch, but for being a better person than I had any right to expect. As Elena drove back to town, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing Robert humbled, in having him acknowledge her worth and beg for her help. But there was also something sadder, a recognition of how different things might have been if he had seen her value from the beginning. That evening, Anna found Elena sitting on their porch, staring out at the mountains. You're thinking about Robert, Anna observed. I'm thinking about justice, Elena replied. 4 years ago he had everything and I had nothing. Now I have everything I wanted and he's losing what he took for granted. Do you feel sorry for him? Elena considered the question. A little. But mostly I feel grateful. His rejection forced me to become strong, to build something real and lasting. If he had accepted me, I might have spent my life trying to be. 6 months after Elena began consulting for Robert's ranch, the transformation was remarkable. Following her recommendations to the letter, Robert had not only avoided foreclosure but was showing his first profit in 3 years. The agritourism program Elena had suggested was booked solid through the next season, and his streamlined cattle operation was more efficient than it had ever been. Elena arrived at the ranch on a crisp November morning for their final consultation meeting. She had been coming twice a week to monitor progress and adjust strategies, maintaining a strictly professional relationship despite Robert's obvious efforts to make their interactions more personal. The numbers look excellent, Elena said, reviewing the latest financial reports in Robert's office. Your debt-to-income ratio has improved by 40%, and you're actually ahead of projections for the year. Robert leaned back in his chair, looking like a different man than the desperate rancher who had begged for her help months earlier. The stress lines around his eyes had eased, and his confidence was returning, though tempered now with hard-earned humility. I owe you more than money can repay, Robert said. You didn't just save my ranch, Elena. You saved my life. Elena packed her laptop with efficient movements. You saved your own life by following good advice. That's what successful people do. Is that what I am now? Successful? Robert asked with a self-deprecating smile. 6 months ago, I was about to lose everything I'd inherited from 3 generations of Whitmores. Success isn't about what you inherit, Elena replied coolly. It's about what you build and maintain through your own efforts. Robert stood up, moving to the window that overlooked his pastures, where healthy cattle grazed peacefully. You know, I've been thinking a lot about the past lately, about the mistakes I made, the opportunities I wasted, the people I hurt. Elena continued organizing her papers, sensing where this conversation was heading and wanting no part of it. Elena, Robert continued, turning back to face her. I know our arrangement was strictly business, but I was hoping maybe we could explore something more personal. Elena looked up from her briefcase, her expression carefully neutral. What do you mean? Robert took a step closer, his voice taking on the persuasive tone she imagined he once used to charm other women. We work well together. You've seen how I've changed, how much I've learned. I think we could be good together, maybe even start over. Start over? Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. I know I hurt you badly when you first arrived, Robert rushed on, seemingly oblivious to the ice forming in Elena's expression. But I'm a different man now. I understand your value, I respect your intelligence. We could build something together. Combine your business sense with my land, create something bigger than either of us could manage alone. Elena stood slowly, her full height adding authority to her presence. Let me understand this correctly. You want to start over because now you realize I'm valuable? Well, yes, but because I've proven I can solve your problems and make you money? Robert's face flushed. It's not just about that. I've come to care for you, to see who you really are. No, Elena said firmly. You've come to see who you need me to be. 4 years ago, you saw a foreign woman with calloused hands and simple clothes, and you decided I wasn't worthy of your name. Now you see a successful businesswoman who can save your ranch, and suddenly, I'm worthy of your attention? People change, Elena. I've changed. Elena moved around the desk, bringing herself face to face with Robert. You haven't changed, Robert. Your circumstances have changed. When you had everything, you treated me like garbage. Now that you need help, you've discovered my worth. That's not growth, that's convenience. Robert reached out as if to touch her arm, but Elena stepped back. Elena, please. Give me a chance to prove I'm different. You want to prove you're different? Elena's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Here's how you can do that. Accept that I will never be interested in you romantically. Accept that your rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. And accept that I've built a life so much better than anything you could have offered me, that your approval is not only unwanted, it's irrelevant. The words hit Robert like physical blows. He sank back into his chair, the confident facade crumbling. I see. I suppose I deserved that. You deserved honesty, Elena said, her tone softening slightly. Robert, I don't hate you anymore. Hate requires caring, and I don't care enough about your opinion to waste energy on strong emotions. You're a client who needed help, and I provided professional services. Nothing more. She moved toward the door, then paused. There is something you should know, though. I'm engaged, Robert's head snapped up. Engaged? Elena smiled, and for the first time that day the expression was genuine and warm. Dr. Patterson asked me to marry him last month. We're planning a spring wedding. Dr. James Patterson had been courting Elena quietly for over a year. Unlike Robert's desperate pursuit of her business services, James had fallen in love with Elena the person, her kindness to his elderly patients, her generosity to struggling families, her sharp wit and gentle humor. He had waited patiently for her to heal from the wounds Robert had inflicted, never pushing, always supporting. Patterson? Robert's voice was hollow. The town doctor? A good man who loves me for who I am, not what I can do for him, Elena confirmed. A man who sees strength in my background instead of shame in my origins. A man who asked me to marry him without first calculating what I could add to his bank account. Robert's face had gone pale. Does he know about us? About what happened when you first arrived? Elena's smile turned sharp. Of course he knows. James knows everything about my past because he loves my whole story, not just the successful parts. He's proud of how far I've traveled, not ashamed of where I started. She opened the office door, then looked back one final time. You know what the real difference is between you and James, Robert? When James looks at me, he sees Elena Volkov, a woman who survived rejection and built something beautiful from nothing. When you look at me, you still see what I can do for you. That's why he's getting a wife, and you're just losing a consultant. Elena left Robert sitting in his office, staring out at the ranch she had saved for him. As she drove back toward town, she felt a profound sense of closure. For 4 years, some part of her had been waiting for this moment, for Robert to truly see what he had thrown away, and for her to be strong enough to reject him in return. But the satisfaction wasn't what she had expected. Instead of triumph, she felt mostly pity for a man who was so focused on external value that he had never learned to recognize genuine worth. Robert would probably spend the rest of his life making the same mistakes, choosing partners based on what they could provide rather than who they were as people. That evening, Elena found James reading in the living room of their shared house. He looked up as she entered, his face brightening with the smile that had first made her heart skip a beat 18 months ago. How did the final meeting go? He asked, setting down his medical journal. Elena curled up beside him on the couch, fitting perfectly against his side. Robert asked me to start over with him romantically. James's eyebrows rose. And? And I told him exactly why that would never happen, Elena said, turning to face the man she loved. I also told him about our engagement. James smiled and kissed her forehead gently. How did he take it? Like a man who finally realized he lost something irreplaceable, Elena replied. But James, I'm grateful he rejected me. If he hadn't, I never would have become the woman you fell in love with. James pulled her closer. I would have fallen in love with you regardless, Elena. But I'm grateful too, because his loss became my greatest gift. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to America seeking a husband and found instead something much more valuable, herself. Robert's rejection had forced her to discover her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for love and success. The frightened young woman who had been discarded like unwanted baggage no longer existed. In her place was a confident businesswoman, a beloved community member, and a woman who knew exactly what she deserved in love and life. Robert Whitmore had called her unworthy 4 years ago. Now she knew the truth. She hadn't been unworthy of him. He had been unworthy of her. And by the time he realized his mistake, Elena had found a man who was worthy of everything she had to offer. The rejected bride had become the woman who could afford to do the rejecting. And that, Elena thought with deep satisfaction, was the sweetest justice of all. The wedding of Elena Volkov and Dr. James Patterson became the most celebrated event Cedar Falls had seen in decades. The entire town seemed to have a personal investment in Elena's happiness, and the outpouring of love and support overwhelmed even Elena's expectations. Mrs. Chen insisted on catering the reception, declaring that no one else would cook for her girl's wedding day. Anna designed the decorations, combining elegant American traditions with touches of Ukrainian culture that honored Elena's heritage. The church ladies volunteered to handle everything from flowers to music, treating the event like a community celebration rather than a private affair. Elena stood in the bridal suite at the historic Cedar Falls Inn, looking at herself in the full-length mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves that reminded her of her grandmother's old wedding photos. Anna had woven tiny blue flowers into her hair, something blue from the old tradition, but also a nod to the Ukrainian flag that still hung in their mother's kitchen back home. You look like a princess, Anna said, adjusting Elena's veil with tears in her eyes. Babusha would be so proud to see you today. Elena touched the small locket around her neck, a gift from her mother that contained a photo of her grandmother. She is seeing me, Elena said softly. I can feel her with us. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. From the church garden, she explained. I thought you might want these for your something borrowed. Elena hugged the woman who had become like a second mother to her. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Chen. Not just today, but for everything. Honey, you gave me more than I ever gave you, Mrs. Chen replied, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. You brought life back to this old town, and joy back to this old heart. The ceremony was held at the Methodist church where Elena had attended services for the past 3 years. The sanctuary was packed with people whose lives Elena had touched, customers from her restaurant, business owners she had helped, families she had fed during hard times, and children she had taught to cook traditional Ukrainian dishes. As Elena walked down the aisle on the arm of Judge Morrison, who had volunteered to give her away, she saw faces beaming with genuine affection and pride. These weren't just wedding guests. They were her chosen family, the community that had embraced her when she needed belonging most. James waited at the altar in his best suit, his face glowing with happiness and love. When their eyes met, Elena felt the same flutter of joy she had experienced on their first real date, when he had taken her to see the northern lights from the hill above town. He had brought a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket, and they had talked for hours about their dreams and fears under the vast Montana sky. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the packed church, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other the missing pieces of their hearts. The vows Elena and James had written themselves brought tears to many eyes. James spoke of falling in love with Elena's courage, her kindness, and her refusal to let life's hardships dim her generous spirit. Elena promised to love James not just in good times, but through all the challenges life might bring. Having learned that true love wasn't about perfect circumstances, but about facing imperfect ones together. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. As James kissed his bride, Elena felt a sense of completion she had never imagined possible. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of everything she had overcome and everything she had become. The reception was held in the community center, transformed by Anna's decorations into a magical space that blended American wedding traditions with Ukrainian folk art. Long tables groaned under the weight of Mrs. Chen's feast, supplemented by dishes from Elena's restaurant and traditional Ukrainian foods that Anna had spent days preparing. Elena moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing moments with the people who had made her new life possible. Tom Bradley, the mailman, told her how proud he was to have watched her journey from scared newcomer to successful businesswoman. Betty Harrison from the flower shop reminisced about the first time Elena had helped with her books, never imagining the quiet foreign girl would become such a force in their community. Even Sheriff Williams, normally a man of few words, pulled Elena aside to tell her, "You've made this town better just by being in it. That's a rare gift, young lady." But it was the moment when her mother, Petra, stood to give a toast that truly moved Elena to tears. Speaking in careful English she had been practicing for months, Petra said, "My daughter Elena came to America with broken heart but strong spirit. She shows us that sometimes the worst thing that happens becomes the best thing that happens. Today we celebrate not just her wedding, but her courage to build beautiful life from broken dreams." The crowd rose in thunderous applause, and Elena saw tears in eyes throughout the room. Even some of the tough ranchers and farmers were dabbing at their faces with handkerchiefs. As the evening progressed, Elena noticed a familiar figure standing alone near the back of the room. Robert Whitmore had come to the wedding, though she hadn't seen him arrive. He stood apart from the celebrating crowd, watching the festivities with an expression of profound regret and loss. James followed Elena's gaze and gently squeezed her hand. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Elena shook her head. "No, he needs to see this. He needs to understand what he lost and what real love looks like." She walked over to Robert, James beside her. Robert straightened as they approached, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Elena," he said quietly, "congratulations. You look radiant." "Thank you for coming, Robert," Elena replied graciously. "I hope you enjoyed the celebration." Robert's eyes swept over the room. The laughing guests, the abundance of food, the clear joy on every face. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can see how much everyone loves you both." "Love like this takes time to build," Elena said gently. "It comes from treating people with respect and kindness, from being part of a community instead of standing above it." Robert nodded, understanding the lesson embedded in her words. "I realize now what I threw away," he said. "Not just you, but the chance to be part of something real and meaningful." James stepped forward, extending his hand to Robert. "I want to thank you," he said, surprising both Elena and Robert. "Thank me?" Robert asked, shaking James's hand uncertainly. "If you had treated Elena the way she deserved when she first arrived, she might never have become the remarkable woman I fell in love with," James explained. "Your rejection forced her to discover her own strength. In a strange way, your mistake became my blessing." Robert's face crumpled slightly. "That's generous of you to say. I hope you know what a treasure you have." "I do," James replied firmly, "and I promise you I'll never take her for granted." After Robert walked away, Elena leaned against her new husband, watching him disappear into the crowd. "Do you really think my rejection was a blessing?" she asked. James turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Elena, if you had married Robert, you would have spent your life trying to be worthy of someone else's approval. Instead, you discovered your own worth and built a life that brings joy to hundreds of people. You became exactly who you were meant to be." As the evening wound down, Elena and James shared their last dance as the community that had embraced them looked on with love and approval. The band played a slow waltz and Elena closed her eyes, remembering the frightened young woman who had walked into Cedar Falls 5 years ago, with nothing but hope and determination. That woman had dreamed of finding a husband, a home, a place to belong. Instead, she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself. And in finding herself, she had discovered a love deeper and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined. The rejected mail-order bride had become the beloved heart of a community. The woman once called Unworthy had proven herself invaluable to everyone who knew her. The scared girl with calloused hands and broken English had become a successful businesswoman, a generous community leader, and a wife cherished beyond measure. As Elena danced with James under the stars of Montana sky, she thought about the letter she would write to her grandmother's memory that night. She would tell her about the wedding, about the love she had found, and about the life she had built with her own two hands, but most of all, she would thank her grandmother for teaching her that true worth comes from within, that love shared multiplies rather than diminishes, and that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the harshest soil. Elena had come to America seeking a new life. What she found was immeasurably better. She found her true self, and in doing so, created a legacy that would outlast any individual relationship or material success. The mail-order bride's story had ended the day Robert rejected her. The story of Elena Patterson, businesswoman, community leader, beloved wife, and woman of unshakable worth, was just beginning. And it promised to be a story worthy of the remarkable woman who was writing it with every choice she made, every hand she helped, and every life she touched.